Hello and welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about tree planting, and Dave Apsley is a local natural resource person for Ohio State University Extension Office. Dave, tell us a little bit about right now we're in who knows what kind of weather we're in right at the moment. It was just snowing earlier today, but they're talking later this week of being 80 degrees.
It is April, so normally by now we would be in perfect tree planting weather. And we like to do a lot of our tree planting in the spring months. I like to be planting either in late March or through the month of April, but I like to have trees in the ground by the end of April if at all possible.
What kind of trees should we be looking at, and how far ahead should we even be thinking about this?
Really, this is April of 2018, and now's the perfect time to start planning for your 2019 planting because, first of all, it's probably too late to get seedlings. And I get the calls this time of year all the time. Folks want to, gosh, it's time to plant trees. But really, you need to think ahead. You need to make sure, most importantly, do a little bit of homework on the soils you're dealing with because there's certain species that do well on certain sites. And if you plant the wrong tree on the wrong site, you're just in for trouble down the road. They might survive initially, but if the soil's too wet or too dry for the species, then they get stressed, and then they are susceptible to insects and disease and other problems down the road. So the big key really is to pick the right species of tree for the site. And normally there's several that'll grow on any given site. But so you need to think about the soils and the site. You need to think about what's out here competition-wise because trees aren't used to competing in grass like this. And so you got to have to work at it to get a successful start. And then also think about why you want to plant the trees. What purpose, what function do you want that tree to serve? Is it something like these pines behind us for a screen to block the wind, or do you want something that's a food source for wildlife, or something that'll grow into timber down the road? So what are you thinking about? And that's where contacting either me, and we'll put my contact up at the end, or your local extension office can help you dig into those soils maps. Our Division of Forestry partners can help too with that planning part of it. But it's really important to pick the right tree, plan ahead, and think about that weed control and all that as you get ready to plant trees. So.
That's great. In one little question, should a ground when you go to plant, should it be completely dry? Should it be, what kind of conditions should the ground be in when we're ready to plant?
It really depends on your soils. These soils got quite a bit of clay in them. So if it's too wet, the soils kind of want to bind up and it'll harden as you pack it, just like you don't want to plow when it's too wet. But if you got a little bit sandier or better drained soil, then you could plant when it's a little wetter. The big deal is you want to plant early in the spring before the bud break on either your hardwoods or your conifers, because at that time is when the root development normally starts too. And if you get them in the ground, the bud breaks, the spring, the moisture's there, and they've got the advantage of that moisture in the soil until it gets later in the growing season. If you plant in June, they miss that opportunity to put the roots out, and then the soils are starting to dry into the summer, and then the trees have a lot harder time. So if you're planting bare root seedlings, you're going to want to plant in the spring. At some places they plant in the fall, but in the winter months we get the frost freezing and thawing, and sometimes the freezing and thawing action will throw these things right out of the ground before they've had a chance to take root.
Now, let me stop you there, Dave. Just for our viewers, what is a bare root seedling versus something else?
These are grown in a nursery. This is a butternut. It was grown in a nursery, and then they'll lift them. And I'm not sure how old these are, but these are at least 2-year-old seedlings, I would guess. Butternut would have a big nut like a black walnut, so they grow fairly fast, but I doubt they'd be this big after 1 year. And then they lift them out of the nursery, take the soil off, and you get them shipped like this.
Straight bare.
You can get container seedlings. They're more expensive. They're obviously a lot more expensive to ship. But for most of our larger tree plantings, if you want to plant several, this is the most economical way to get seedlings. And again, spring, you want to get them in the ground and growing. So when it warms up and these buds start to swell and it starts growing, the roots can start hitting the ground as well.
Okay. All right, great. So let's look at some of the equipment that we're talking about. I
like to give these guys a little bit of a haircut before I plant them. If you got real stringy roots, I'm going to let you hold that one.
Okay.
And we'll grab another one, even more bigger example. If you got a tree like this and you're trying to put it in a hole, and you don't make a big enough hole, these roots are going to get heading in the wrong direction. Sometimes they're even hanging out of the ground.
Right.
If that happens, they're going to dry the seedling out really well. So I like to trim them down to make sure they'll fit in the hole. You don't want to get crazy and get way back into these big lateral roots, but you can do some trimming on these to get them into the ground.
And that won't kill it.
It won't kill it. Actually, sometimes it'll stimulate the root production.
To make it grow a little more vigorous.
Right. The big key, too, is if I'm planting something this big, I need to make sure I'm matching my planting technique and the tool I'm using so that, you know, the more of the root you can get in the ground, the better.
Okay.
But it's better to get them in right. I've heard the old stories of extension forester talking about having a hard time getting them in, so the landowner just twists them to get them in there. And now you can imagine when those roots start growing and they start choking each other out and they wonder why the thing dies. Yep. So you want to get them in there, you want to get them spread out and in good soil contact.
So we're looking at a tree there that's got what, maybe a 5 or 6 inch root, you know, horizontal. What size hole do we need for that?
Well, you want a hole that's at least as big as that. You don't want to force something in and compact it in. So you want to, the bigger the hole, the better. So it's a matter of, you know, just what's efficient and what you can do. But I would typically prune some of this extra off. And this one would be hard to plant. You could do it with a shovel. It'd take you a while. Or you could do it with the auger that we've got there. But to do it with that tree planting bar or dibble bar, it would be very tough to get that in the ground appropriately. And I can show you how much trouble that would be. You can get them in, but it's not ideal.
Okay.
In the same way with this one, give it a little bit of a pruning job. That's a little bit more manageable to be able to get, but I like to just get rid of some of the stray roots and give it a little bit of a haircut.
Now, when we do this, Dave, do we need to put any kind of fertilizer with them or anything? Like, you know, back in some of the days, we always put water and a little bit of fertilizer with it or something?
If you plant in the right soil conditions, you shouldn't need to fertilize in the hole. Yeah. But as far as that soil and site condition, depending on what you're trying to grow, trees aren't super nutrient demanding, not like corn and soybeans. If you're growing Christmas trees, you want to get optimal growth, then you really want to go out and make sure you got the right fertility out there. But normally you're going to broadcast that, get your soil fertility and your pH in balance ahead of time before you ever start planting. There are some folks early on that would actually do some little bit of slow release nutrients in the hole, and there's mixed feelings about that. I know some folks that will auger a hole and mix a bunch of compost in. Yeah. And I've got mixed feelings about that, because if you make that planting hole too good for the tree, the roots don't want to reach out as far and expand. So really it's about getting the right tree on the right site and having the right soil conditions before you plant.
Now, is there obviously there's probably a book or something that we can determine what tree goes on what ground, or we can just call you, but
I would probably recommend calling either your local soil extension office, your local soil and water office, or your local Division of Forestry Service Forester, because they're going to know your local soils. You can find a book on it. They've actually got web access to the soil surveys. They have the hand old printed books, but they also have an online version which you can go to too. It's called the Web Soil Survey, which will give you some recommendations. But sometimes the list of trees they offer on there is pretty limited, and we've got more options than that. So that local knowledge of the soils is what I would recommend. Talk to somebody, because they might have tried it on the site right down the road and had success or not, and you can learn from those folks. Save you, it's expensive and time consuming, and you want to be as successful as you can be.
Alrighty. So we used the little clipper there, Dave. What else would we need to do multiple tree pruning?
Uses just a little hand pruner, a little bypass pruner. Back in the day, we used to have a board with us and a hatchet, but to me, this is easier to handle.
A little cleaner.
And I tend to like to prune them all before I ever leave the shop and have them
ready to go.
Planting a few, you don't need this, but this is a tree planting bag specifically for it. And you can keep your trees in the bag with some peat moss or something to keep moisture on them. Today you don't really need it as much, but if you get a day that's sunny and the humidity's low, you do not want these fine roots to dry out. It doesn't take very long in the full sun and low humidities for the roots to dry out, and when these fine roots dry out, they're dead. So you're giving these trees a big disadvantage. You could also carry around, you know, depending on how many you're planting, a 5-gallon bucket with some water in it. But you do want to keep them moist and protected as you're out there in the field.
Okay.
So that's probably the most critical thing
Hmm.
when you're actually planting.
And obviously when you're planting, I see a little kneeling board or something over there.
Yeah.
Is that our?
That's just a personal preference. I don't like.
Yeah.
I'm getting old. My knees hurt, and
Yeah.
it keeps you dry.
Well, that's
and
true. I
Keeps
can
you
see
from
that.
getting dirty.
Uh-huh.
The real key with planting trees too, and we'll talk about as we get down there, is make sure you get them at that right depth. Is the other real key. A lot of people
Yeah.
want to plant them too shallow or too deep. And we'll talk about that more as we get into it.
Okay.
But really, that's about all
Dibble
bars
Uh-huh.
that you can use. But you can see you want that root system to be able to fit in that thing you're using. So this tree is probably too big to
Too
be
big.
planted with this bar.
Yeah.
Some of them are a little wider and are a little thicker.
Mm-hmm.
That make a more like a triangle type shaped pole.
Mm-hmm.
But really, this dibble bar wouldn't be suitable for planting something this big unless you went to a lot of extra time and made a couple extra slits, and I'll show you how to do that too.
Okay.
But a shovel works perfectly well. You could use just a hand post hole digger.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing is you want to make plenty of hole to get that thing in so those roots are oriented the way they came
Give a
out of
chance
the
to
nursery.
grow.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's plant a
With
tree.
this dibble bar, the way I typically do it is I like to get the thing all the way in the ground. And a lot of people want to do this. They want to go back and forth and back and forth.
Uh-huh.
Why wouldn't we do that? Can you imagine what
Well,
I just did?
It looks like you're compressing soil.
I am, and really when you look down in the hole, and Sarah can't see it from where she is, but what we've created is almost like an hourglass. We got
Yeah.
a small area where that thing was pivoting back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a big open spot at the bottom and a big open spot at the top, but you're not going to be able to get those roots packed in right.
Yeah.
So what we like to do, put the dibble bar in the ground, pull it back just one time,
One top.
and you're making a kind of a triangle shaped hole. You want to get the roots down in and see what's wrong there. You don't
They're
want
sticking
that.
up. Yeah.
So that's why it's hard with a dibble bar unless you got
Right.
big enough deal. And I like to go deeper than I need to and then pull them back and make sure those roots are oriented down. The other real key is you'll usually see a color change from what was underground and what's above the ground. And you want to plant it slightly deeper than it came out of the ground.
Uh-huh.
If you're too shallow, then you got roots that are too high.
Right.
And you don't want to be too deep either. But so you want to be just maybe a half inch or so deeper than it came out of the ground in the nursery.
Okay.
And then you're going to put a dibble bar behind it. You're going to compress the bottom back in and pull the top forward. And that guy should be in the ground pretty tight where you can pull on him without pulling him out of the ground.
Pulling them out of the ground.
And then I like to go back and just kind of close this back in. And really, I pulled too soon because what you should do is give it a good stomp, and maybe we'll plant a different one because I didn't do that one
Okay.
perfectly. But you should be able to pull on them, and they should stay in the ground pretty good.
Pretty good. Yeah. And from here, you really don't do anything else to it.
Not really. The biggest thing from now on is the weed control in the summer months.
Weed control in the summer months.
Yeah, if it's they're growing in weeds when this grass starts getting tall, they're not going to have much of a chance. So you really need to control the weeds.
Okay.
And while we're here, looking across at Piketon reminds you of the south centers here, the deer fence.
Yeah.
Deer do like to browse seedlings, so in a lot of cases, folks are putting these tubes on the trees, and I didn't bring any with me today.
Uh-huh.
But if you got lots of deer pressure, you want to consider buying the tree tubes to put on as well to protect them from the deer browsing. So at least gets them up to where they're getting a little
tall.
size. Yeah.
And at that point, they could take a little nip or something here or there.
Yeah, deer will browse up to about 4.5 or 5 feet. So I've seen people use 5-foot tubes if you got a lot of deer pressure.
Okay. And so we got a dibble bar. Dave, we got an auger. Give us a little bit about that. And
so an auger, for me, this is just a cheap one-person auger.
Uh-huh.
You can go rent one from your local rental place. But for me, it's almost as quick to plant with an auger as it is with the dibble bar, especially these big seedlings.
Okay.
One thing I will caution, if you've got soils that are too much clay and you're augering when the ground's a little too wet, it can glaze over this edge, and you can actually almost seal this up to the point where the trees the roots can't grow out of there. So sometimes it's not a bad idea and this soil's perfectly fine, but I like to score up even the sides a little bit just to eliminate some of that.
Right.
Some of the old extension pubs really were not big fans of augers because some people were doing it into real clay soils, and you just created this basically impermeable layer that the roots wouldn't go through.
Okay.
You want me to run the auger? Or?
Well, let's whatever you want to do, Dave. Let's plant one.
We'll go ahead and plant one since I've got it augered. I think it's pretty obvious how the auger runs.
So we're back, and we're going to use an auger to plant the next tree. And Dave, you're talking about an auger. You've got a little bit of safety gear on. You've got some gloves. We've got some ear protection. You know, our glasses is safety.
Yeah.
So we always got to think of that and think of safety as we're doing this as well.
The biggest thing with the auger is you're operating with your ears pretty close to this motor, probably more so than any piece of power equipment you're using. So I always like to use the hearing protection. I can't hear you talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, it can be dangerous. You don't want loose stuff.
Loose clothing around.
Either keep your jacket zipped up, or if you got jacket strings, they can get twisted up in the auger and kind of want to pull you in.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the main thing, is really the hearing protection is your biggest thing that you need to run the auger.
Because you're going to probably be drilling hole after hole after hole.
Yeah, you're going to drill a bunch of holes. Even one can do damage. Other safety things is just common sense. When you're using a gas engine, you don't want to refill it when it's hot.
Yep.
I don't like to refill them in the field anyway, because I don't want to spill gas out in the field and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But just common sense.
Common sense, and obviously we hope that wherever we're drilling, we don't have any electric
That's
wires
a very good point.
or water lines or anything
Yeah, we're
like
in
that.
a farm
So always
field,
make sure.
you know, we're okay here. But certainly we're only drilling about 8 to 10 inches deep, but it
So
always
theoretically
makes
we're
sense
shooting.
to take that precaution and
Yeah.
have the OOPS folks come out and mark it.
All right. Well, Dave, let's show us.
I'll see if it'll start. One thing you'll notice on this cutting edge, if you're drilling in sod, it'll pick up a bunch of grass right there. And if it does that, it won't want to auger too well. So you want to keep that edge clean as you're augering. Actually, if you clear a little sod out of the way, sometimes stuff. Okay, let's find something to plant. Straggler roots, you want to make sure they're off so that my hole, when those roots are hanging in there, are hanging downward. Coming out, and the root's right there. So that's the depth it was in the nursery. And I want to be just a little bit deeper. I'll start raking some of the soil in, and then I like to pack it down in at the bottom. And then just keep working all the soil that I can in. And it always seems like you come up with less than you need, especially when it's a little too wet.
Yeah.
But you want to pack it all in, and that's why this trowel works good, because you can recover all your soil. Sometimes I'll even find a place next door and borrow a little extra soil to put it, so I can get it all in there good. And probably the best thing, if you can do a little prep work on that site where you don't have so much grass, it's a lot easier to plant them. And then
Should it be mounded up, Dave, at all?
I don't like to mound it, no, and then I like to give it a good stomp at the last minute, and then they're in there pretty good. You have to pull pretty hard. You'd tear the top out before you got it out.
Okay.
As far as the mounding, I'm not a big fan of mounding. I like to just plant them slightly deeper, and if anything, you know, having a little water, especially if it's a little droughty site, a little water pooling around the base isn't a bad thing.
Okay.
If it's a real wet site, you might want to mound them a little bit higher, but typically we don't. If you're planting a really wet site, sometimes we'll even bed furrow and plow and make a little mound and plant on the mound if it's a really wet site. But yeah.
So how long would a tree like this, Dave, take to grow?
Well, it just depends on soil and site conditions. This is a little fir tree that they'll use in the Christmas tree industry. And that first year it'll be a little slow. But after that, you'll get a good foot to 16 inches of growth out of it a year. So
from here to a tree like this, What are we talking about? How many years?
But this tree grew from here up to here in 1 year. That's one growth.
That's one growth.
And then there's one up there up higher.
So
this
you can
tree
count them.
grew almost, what, 2.5 feet that year? And the next year grew over 3 feet. So that first year or two, they'll grow a little slow. But once they get the roots established, that white pine can really start putting
It grows
height
quick.
there.
Okay. Yeah. And what if we were talking about that butternut, Dave? What's an average of it? I'm guessing a lot slower.
You know, depending on your soil and site, depending on deer pressure, but it could grow. It wouldn't grow that much, but it could easily grow 12 to 18 inches in height a year.
Okay.
It seems like those first few years, just getting the root systems established takes a while, but then once they get rooted, then they'll start really putting some height and diameter growth on.
Great, great. Any last thing that we should cover, Dave?
As far as tree planting, I think, you know, it's the couple things you want to think about is planning ahead, getting the right site. I like to spray an herbicide strip, and depending on your soil conditions and what you're trying to grow. For me, if I'm planting this whole area in trees, I'm going to plan on mowing them between the rows every year. So if I can maintain a 3-foot wide strip with the trees growing down that strip, then mowing down the rows is easy.
Right.
If you got to mow in and between all the time, that's a pain. And you don't, especially in this heavy sod, you don't want grass sod growing right around because it really competes. The roots of this sod are going to compete for the same moisture, fertility that the trees need. So anything you can do to reduce that competition from weeds, especially in that first 3 to 5 years of establishment. The first year is super critical, but then early on, if you keep the weed competition down, you're going to get more growth.
Great. And one last thing, how do we contact you, Dave, for any information on the trees?
You can do one of two things. You can call me at 740-710-3009, or you can email me at Apsley, APSLEY .1 at OSU.edu. And go ahead.
Oh, I believe we've covered a day to plant trees, and we'll look forward to the next session on maybe not tree harvesting, but in between.
Okay.
What should we do? Yeah,
some
maintenance,
maintenance
exactly.
work on it.
So
that sounds like a plan.